Good evening.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I believe I'm fine.
Oh, good. And hope you weren't waiting long.
No, I just gotta, yeah,
Oh, good.
I'm
Thank you.
just glad I'm in the right place,
This
if
is
I am.
and you are, and we're just to let you know we're broadcasting on YouTube. So at the moment, so anyway, the mics are hot. But
Okay,
so
good to know.
hi everybody who's listening to the broadcast, which may not be anybody at the moment, but anyway,
But it may be somebody, yeah.
it may be somebody.
Um, Dr. Talame, I'm really looking forward to your presentation. It's Rebecca last year. We've corresponded a bit. And we had a question from our treasurer about where to send you a check. So I have your university address, obviously. Would you prefer a home address?
Yeah, the people are still not back at the university on a daily basis. If it goes there, who knows when I'll see it. So,
Okay,
um, are you ready? I'll tell you.
absolutely.
Okay, 504 Glen Hope Road,
One N or two?
one N.
Two separate words?
Yes. Oxford, Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
19363.
6-3. Okay, we'll make sure that gets to you.
Great, thank you.
And Katja, did we decide who was doing what tonight?
No, apparently we haven't. So would you like me to do the questions this time? I think we keep alternating, I believe.
Sure. That
All
would
right.
I would be honored to do the intros.
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Professor
Need to
Talby,
practice screen sharing here.
oh, great. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
All right, looks like it's going to work. We got a lot of things open here. Let me. Now, do you want me to leave it up or do you have other things to show?
I think it's nice to leave it up because we'll at 7:30 I'll make a brief list of introductions, and then Rebecca, I believe that you'll do the full introduction, I guess.
I will, yes.
Okay, that's great. And yeah, so I think to have we'll basically go right into your presentation.
Okay, great.
I'm doing some work for I'm a part-time university student doing some work virtually in southern Pennsylvania, studying charcoal hearths in and around the state game lands, so at Hopewell Furnace and other parts of Pennsylvania. So so I'm seeing a lot of your state from a distance, but spending quality time in Pennsylvania from my computer.
Good. This is all from a historical perspective.
Oh, it's all historical manufacture of charcoal, and I'm not the lead researchers are from Muhlenberg College, archaeologists there, but I'm doing some computer work for them to find the charcoal hearths, but they're the ones who have the credit about actually doing the analysis and about the history and what and its development in Pennsylvania. So it's been a nice project to work on.
When were these hearths active?
They late 1700s. I think the first one was around 1716 or so, and the last one went out of service in 1945. So
really?
I guess there was still some I guess in still I guess some use of charcoal up until that time. So it was pretty durable industry.
Yeah, well, I think I'm surprised about 1945 because they pretty much denuded most of Pennsylvania with that, and they were bringing in the wood from someplace else, I think.
It was, yeah, I guess the part of the study was to see how much these hearths were reused, I guess, as forests presumably regenerated. But yeah, I guess the other side was to see, well, how much wood was consumed by this industry over the years. And yeah, I guess the volumes are staggering when
Yeah.
trying to add it up.
Yeah. I heard the Civil War, actually, that what wasn't leveled before the war was leveled during the war, because
Oh, wow.
I guess it just took an awful lot of energy. It was all in the form of wood to run everything.
Yeah, I guess that would have been the predominant source. And I think even at that time, making steel was still, I think it was relatively new by using mineral coal. Because I guess they had to solve the problem of trying to heat the coal to high enough to temperature, I guess. But yeah, it's that whole idea of energy supplying war. It's going to go, it's going to consume whatever it needs to consume, I guess. So
That's right. That's right.
There's a heartbreaking story called The Golden Spruce, which is about this iconic, 400 or 500-year-old Sitka spruce tree in Canada's Northwest. And it's more about the destruction of the old growth forest on Vancouver Island, and particularly some of these really iconic species like the Sitka spruce and the Douglas pine. And the spruce was used extensively during, I think, the Second World War to manufacture aircraft, because it could be sliced really, really thin into lightweight material to make planes. And at one point, even the British High Command acknowledged that maybe they were using it at unsustainable rates.
Well, they did the same thing with the cypress in the South, and that's pretty much what sealed the ivory-billed woodpecker's fate, because they had huge forests with huge trees, and the woodpecker depended on them, and they took them all. Same thing for aircraft.
Are you familiar at all with Joyce Hostin's work?
No, I don't believe so.
She's up here in Kingston, Ontario, and I'm just noticing the picture of this beautiful little yellow-headed bird that slightly resembles a chickadee, but I'm not sure what it is.
No, that's the hermit warbler, and it's kind of a trick photo there, because it's from the Pacific Northwest, and we have grandchildren in Portland. So I got this picture out there, but everybody thinks it's from the east and they can't figure out what it is.
Well, with
it's
climate
a little
change
bit bigger than a chickadee, not much though.
With climate change and extreme weather, we occasionally get oddities here. We had a yellow-headed blackbird here.
Oh, did you?
A few years ago, after a storm that blew up from somewhere near Texas, because I gather that's where they're native to.
They're found throughout the Midwest. I think even up into Nebraska. But
not usually this far north, though.
No.
Anyway, I asked about Joyce Hostin because she's doing work on rewilding. Mm-hmm. We've asked her to come and speak to our club in November, I believe. And I was listening to one of her talks a few weeks ago. She made the comment that, there's almost a tipping point in the number of native trees that you have and the existence of some of these iconic bird species. And I think for chickadees, she said, once you get below about 30% native trees, they can't survive. They don't have enough food sources.
Yeah, I think she's actually citing our research with that. That figure comes from my grad student who worked in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and that was the figure. If you don't have, it's not 30%, it's 30% non-native. If you exceed 30% and you have less than 70%, then the populations are unsustainable.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah. Yep. The native species are important. But you know, the non-native species are not making the bird food. It's that simple. And you take away the bird food, you take away the birds.
Yeah, I think of Norway maple in urban forests here in Canada. So that's that. Would that be an example? Do you think, or is
Yeah.
that? Yeah. Okay.
That's, you know, it's a related maple, but particularly Norway maple has a little white milky sap. If you pull one of the branches off and look at the base of the petiole, this white goo comes out, and our maples don't have that. So our the insects that specialize in maples here can't handle that. So sometimes they can switch over a little bit, but Norway maple's not one of those times. So
Interesting.
I am going to take a final walk about, and I will be right back.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
So Jeff, we're live on YouTube right now.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And hello to everyone on YouTube. Well, hi, Kathy. We're gonna we'll get started at 7:30. And I think there's a couple of people in the audience watching now. So thanks for joining early.
Okay, just turn my sound off on YouTube. I had the wrong window open.
And do you see it now? Lisa, I
Yep.
see it. Okay. Oh, great.
I've got it now, yeah.
Excellent.
So there's 4 watching now. I was on this other one that said 2, first 1, so that would have been me, and then 2, but it was the blank one, the blank gray one. So I figured, okay, I'm not on the right one. Right, so
By the way, does anybody know how to reach Lynn Armstrong other than her email address?
I'll have her phone. Her phone number is around here somewhere. So how about I'll look that up in a few minutes and send it over to you.
Oh, that would be great. Thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely. Glad.
I've got a dozen or so tomato seedlings she ordered, and I haven't had a response back from her yet. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any announcements that I need to share on air? What is that? What you'll do, Jeff, with the club?
Yes. All I'm gonna say is that briefly that our sale is closed, and we'll have results from the sale soon. But that's the only announcement I intend to make, unless there's anything else I should say.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It did really well. Like, I was amazed at things just sold out like that. Because, you know, when you're collecting the money, that's a good thing.
That's good. Oh, yeah.
Well, it looks like it's something we're going to do again, clearly. It's a lot of work for a few people, though, getting set up. I'm sure.
This is,
Yes.
it's something the Master Gardeners are planning for June. I'm not even sure exactly what dates we had it down for, but we kind of got all enthusiastic about the idea, partly because the OHS was so successful, and some of the other garden clubs too. And we didn't actually put anybody in charge of it yet.
Oh no, so it's not happening.
Oh no, it'll happen. We're having a special meeting on Thursday night to make sure that it does. But it's you know, the Master Gardeners, the local group, is really, they're such an impressive bunch. Like, people just pitch in and help out. And especially in a year like this, where, you know, we're required to do a certain number of volunteer hours to maintain our status. And with all the markets kind of shutting down, the farmers markets don't want us there because their space is limited and they have to distance and all that stuff. So there's fewer opportunities for people to volunteer.
Yeah, it's a different type of outdoor experience right now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we have to adapt gently. Yeah. Okay, so I'll keep my eyes out on the questions through YouTube, and then Jane will send them through the chat box, I guess, for questions, correct?
That's right. And I think if any questions do come in by email,
Oh, she'll,
Jane's watching that as well. And
yeah,
well, yeah,
okay.
I'm counting my lucky stars. I think I've dodged a possible poison ivy. In fact, what's it?
On
Affliction?
a walk or your backyard?
Backyard, yeah. So
Oh,
it's I was cutting back. I was hacking back shrubs and raspberry canes, and I looked down, saw poison
oops.
ivy there, and it's like, oh, okay, well, all right, step carefully. So it was okay.
Mm. You had your long pants on.
No, I was foolishly, no, it was just totally wrong. I'm usually more careful because I know it's there. But anyway, yeah, I've had two good go rounds with it over the years. So
Oh, you've reacted. Yeah.
yeah, like a 3 week sort of kind of thing going. Yeah. So I'm pretty careful with it most of the
Yeah.
time. So I'm glad my careless time was not punished, at least so far.
There's a few other nasties out there to look out for too, like the wild parsnip and
Mm-hmm.
giant hogweed is one that it's hard to miss, fortunately.
Yeah, I've got
unfortunately.
I've got parsnip in that same path. Yeah, I've got it there too. So it's, yeah, you're right. It's there. So yeah.
So there's Kate. Welcome,
there.
Kate. We have 6 minutes. Yeah.
Have we got a good audience showing up on the YouTube catch up?
So, well, it's increasing to 12 now. Yeah.
People squeezing in those last few minutes in the garden before the sun goes down.
Yeah, they'll start popping up soon.
Beautiful evening. Yeah.
We're up against a playoffs game apparently.
Oh no.
Yeah. Same time. So
That's terrible. It's not the
No.
the Montreal versus Toronto one.
It's
it?
Leafs and Habs, I think.
Oh boy.
Oh, that's the big one. Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah.
That's tough competition.
I was scheduled to give a talk at the Smithsonian once, and at the exact same time and place, they also had David Attenborough.
Oh no, how unfair.
I said, yeah, well, who thought that one through? I want to go see David Attenborough. You know?
Darn.
Oh dear, that's very unfair.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take my face off and then so I won't show up on the screen. There we go.
Oh, it's fine. That's not bad.
Well, when the introductions come, Rebecca's
Okay.
going to talk, and I think once there was whoever was made the sound last, I'll take my mute. I'll put on mute or something. Yeah.
And just for our audience on YouTube, thank you for joining. If you like, feel free to use the comments box to say hi or note where you're joining us from. We'll be starting at 7:30 per usual.
How many people do you usually get for these things?
It really varies. And unfortunately, this has been the big gardening weekend around here this past weekend. So as I wasn't kidding when I said people are probably out in their gardens right now.
I
but we've
appreciate
had
that.
I would say we probably average somewhere around 60 or 70 people a meeting. Sometimes a little bit more than that. And since we've moved to the virtual format, it's rather nice because folks who maybe were members of our society in the past and have moved to another city are able to join back in. So we've had people from places like Toronto and Southwestern Ontario join these meetings, which is it's one of those silver linings, I guess.
I must just ask a local question to Doug. Which I'm wondering if you're getting any competition from the cicadas while you're while you're giving this talk.
It's really spotty. So at our house, we have very few, which makes sense at our house because 17 years ago, all of our trees were about 2 feet high. So there weren't enough cicadas to lay eggs in them to generate a good population this time around. I'm hoping we get them to fly in and do that so we can actually increase the population. Every place you go, though, it gets smaller and smaller. But there's a good emergence down in Washington. My son lives down there, and he showed me a picture of his yard. There are places around here, though, that are, have big old trees. They should be there, and they're not. So it's spotty. But
I'm kind of sorry to miss that. I don't know if they get up as far north as this, or
I
if
don't
it's
think
really,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. Go a little bit farther north on the coast.
Okay.
But Illinois, there's a lot in Illinois.
I have a friend who's acoustician, and also a keen native plant gardener. So he's been protecting his young native trees that he's put in recently with big netting things around them. But he's also been going out desperately recording everything and trying to work out which species have turned up.
Yeah, there's 3 species and they're often all 3 in one place.
Wow.
Where's he live?
He's at University of Maryland.
Oh, okay.
Can't remember which campus.
What's his name?
Bernie Lohr.
Hmm.
I think he focuses on birds rather than insects, but anyway, he
I got my
records a lot of
PhD at
animals.
University of Maryland. So,
Ah,
and his name sounds familiar. He wasn't there when I was there, but
we were in the same animal communication lab at Duke once upon a time.
okay.
So he came from there.
Neat. I think there are quite a few cicadas down there in College Park. So.
Yeah.
Well, this has been very nice to have a chat before our presentation, but it's 7:30. I'd like to welcome our audience on YouTube. My name is Jeff Blackadar. I'm the president of the Ottawa Horticultural Society, and just to bring you a bit of news about our plant sale. Our plant sale and auction has closed tonight as of 6 o'clock. We're looking forward to the results, but thanks to the generosity of our donors and all the people who have purchased plants, I'm told that we've done very well. And thank you very much to Tula Talvala, Rob Brandon, and others who have worked so hard putting this on. We've had a successful fundraiser that look forward to telling you more about. And also we'll be making arrangements to get the plants in the hands of those who bought them, so you can get them into the ground. I'll turn things over to Rebecca Last, co-chair of our program committee, to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Jeff. And we're really honored and delighted to have with us tonight Doug Talame, who's a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware. He's the author of over 104 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for more than 40 years. One of his main research goals is to better understand the ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal kingdoms. His book, Bringing Nature Home: How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens, was published in 2007 and was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. More recently, The Living Landscape, which co-authored with Rick Dark, was published in 2014. And his latest book, Nature's Best Hope, was released by Timber Press in February 2020, and it's a New York Times bestseller. Among his awards are the Garden Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award of Excellence, the 2018 American Horticultural Society B.Y. Morrison Communication Award, and the 2019 Cynthia Westcott Scientific Writing Award. So we're really honored, and I think for the many of us in the audience who are interested in wildlife gardening, we'll have a lot to learn tonight.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I always have a lot to say, so we'll get started right away. I do want to tell you about my idea of what nature's best hope is, but before I do that, I want to return to what happened on much of the East or North America in 2019. We had what we call an oak mast, where all the members of the red oak group got together and decided to make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I'm easily entertained, so I took one of those acorns and I just stared at it. But I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First, it chewed a little hole for its head, forced its head through there. Then it forced its entire body through that hole. It was a tight squeeze, looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally plopped down, and that's a very dangerous time for this insect larva because it is good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming below the surface of the soil in about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and makes a chamber. And within that chamber, it converts itself to a pupa, where it stays for 2 years, and then finally emerges as an acorn weevil. This is what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think they have big noses, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are way down at the end of that extension. And they take those mouth parts and chew a hole down into the center of the acorn, turn around, lay an egg in that hole, and that's how the larva gets down into that acorn. Well, you might wonder why they spend 2 years underground. Why don't they come out the very next year? And that's a good question, because most insects do come out the next year. But it takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. And if they came out the next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Once they're out, though, of course, that leaves a hole in the acorn, a true vacuum. And you know that nature abhors a vacuum. So in this case, she has filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives inside the holes made by acorn weevils in acorns. And if they find a new acorn, they're excited because their old acorn's falling apart. So they tell everybody it's time to move. They grab the larvae, they grab the eggs, they work very hard and move the entire colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes. Then they post a guard here at the entrance, make sure nobody else comes in. And then they will live inside this new acorn for the next 2 years until it falls apart. What's my point? My point is that is simply one of literally millions of very specialized interactions between animals and plants that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and oaks. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They'll take an acorn and fly up to a mile from the parent tree. Then they tap it beneath the surface of the soil. The idea is they're going to go get that acorn and have something to eat during the wintertime. But jays only remember where they buried about 1 in 4 acorns. So they actually end up planting sometimes thousands of new oak trees every single fall per jay. This is another specialized interaction between witch hazel and winter moths. Turns out winter moths are the pollinators, major pollinators of witch hazel. A number of species of winter moths. This is the bicolored sallow. They do it at night, so we don't normally see it, but these moths are flying when it's very cold. I caught this guy on Christmas Eve, as a matter of fact. So this solves a mystery for me. I never knew what was pollinating our witch hazel. You won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have lots of carpenter ants, because they have a specialized interaction with carpenter ants. That's what they feed their young. And you won't have carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have this plant, Facilia. This is blooming right in the front of my house right now. That is the only pollen that particular bee can rear its young on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. about 4,000 species of native bees in North America, and over a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So for example, in the upper Midwest, there are at least 13 species of native bees that can only reproduce on the pollen of perennial sunflowers. You won't have the Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtlehead. I could talk about specialized interactions all night long. The problem, though, is that today these types of relationships, nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, "Leave it as it is." And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Of course, we can't leave the country as it was because we haven't. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states is anywhere close to their original pristine ecological condition. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it. We have drained it. We've grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland just in the US. And that is equal to 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we've paved it and otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In fact, we have carved up those natural areas into just tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. You might wonder why we've done all that. I wonder too, but I suspect we thought that the earth, our nest, was so large that we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that. That's why we're seeing headlines like this, pretty scary headlines. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. It's almost a third of the North American bird population gone. Now the UN says, well, we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction, probably in the next 20 years. And I love the way they say this, as if it's an option, you know. They might as well say we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years and then go on to the next headline. We cannot afford to lose 1 million species any more than we can afford to lose oxygen. So we have to do something about this. I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, the great E.O. Wilson from Harvard, most famous entomologist of all times, told us what it would mean if we lost our insects. And he did it in a paper way back in 1987 called The Little Things That Run the World. His message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappear, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial habitats that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, even many of our freshwater fish, those food webs would collapse and those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that that does not have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do that. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on nature and what we call ecosystem services, products produced by nature that are the life support systems for us and everything else. Here are just some of the things that plants do for life on Earth. They produce oxygen, pretty important. They clean our water, slow its journey to the sea where it's too salty to use. Carbon capture, enormously important today. They're pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, building their tissues out of it, and then pumping the extra carbon into the ground through their roots. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have deposited there over the eons. And once it's in the soil, it's stable. It can stay there for thousands of years. Plants build topsoil and they hold it in place. They prevent floods. They dampen severe weather. They convert sunlight into food. Pretty important. When we lose our plants, we gotta eat sunlight without them. What do animals do for plants? Well, they provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So developing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today we've got 7.8, 7.9 billion people on the planet. We need more ecosystem services today than ever before. So taking huge areas of the earth out of production and putting them into a status symbol, just not a good idea. There have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth. And Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, there have been indigenous groups that have been able to do that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area. Then we go to another area, do the same thing, clearly not sustainable. So Aldo had a dream that we humans were actually capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He recognized that we had to use the earth. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he believed we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. And that's what he called the land ethic. He wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac. What he did not write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still embedded in our own culture today, that he may not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue this evening is that living with nature not only is an option, it's now the only viable option that's left to us. Of course, in the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head. We need to save nature, actually reconstruct it where we've dismantled it, where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. In other words, we now have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Thrive, not hang on by a thread, not get smaller every day, but thrive. Where should we start? Well, let's go back to private property. We can't ignore conservation on private property because most of the land is privately owned. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. A huge portion of southern Canada is privately owned. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. If we ignored private property when we're doing conservation, we will fail because we won't be working on areas that are large enough and connected enough to sustain the species that we all depend on. There are a number of conservation options, though, that we're not taking full advantage of, like power and pipeline rights of ways. There's 21 million acres in those types of landscapes. They could be excellent scrub habitat. Railroad rights of ways, 3 million acres. Golf courses, another 2 million acres. Airports are 3 million acres. You know, the Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. These are big places. Roadsides, another 17 million acres. Then we have all the places where we live, both in rural areas and suburbia and cities, hundreds of millions of acres in those types of landscapes. If you add up just those spaces, that totals 599 million acres where we could be doing conservation, but right now we're really not focusing on. How big is 599 million acres? It's big. It's bigger than Vermont, plus New Jersey, plus Maine, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Florida, Oklahoma, Montana, plus California and Texas. Not having a place to do conservation is not the issue. We can do conservation almost everywhere. Now, when I talk about conservation, what I really mean is rebuilding nature where we've dismantled it. But not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally. So we have to start with the building blocks, and then other species can come later. Or it's not going to work. There are a couple of building blocks that are essential, and one of them is our flowering plants and the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. These plants, of course, are capturing energy from the sun and turning it into food, which is then stored in their parts, mostly their leaves. So now we have the energy from the sun as food in plant leaves, But in order to have that food mean anything, we have to get it to animals. Most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants. That something typically is insects. And it turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So when we're rebuilding nature, we have to design landscapes that have lots of caterpillars, or we're going to have failed food webs and it won't work. Let me give you an example from the Carolina chickadee. You have the black-capped chickadee up there, and they're practically the same bird doing the same things. Chickadees are the birds that are at our bird feeders all winter long, eating seed, and people think that's what they need. Well, it's part of what they need in the wintertime. About 50% of their diet in the winter is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders. But when they are reproducing, they switch entirely to insects because their babies can't eat seeds. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will feed their young almost exclusively on caterpillars. And chickadees are not exceptions. 96% of North America's terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? There's a number of lines of evidence that suggest that, but this is a citizen science project that one of my students finished a few years ago, Ashley Kennedy. She put out a call to bird photographers across the country and asked them to take pictures of birds during the breeding season, right now, when they're carrying food to the nest. And then send those pictures to Ashley. She's going to identify the prey items that were in the beaks of the birds and reconstruct the nestling diets of as many bird families as she could in North America. And these are most of her results. Most common, 20 common bird families in North America. The green bars are the percentage of those nestling diets that were caterpillars. And in 16 out of the 20 bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we took caterpillars out of the landscape. Most of our birds would not be able to breed successfully. So something special about caterpillars. Let's figure out what it is. Actually, there's several things special about caterpillars. And one of them is that they're soft. So think of this guy as if he is a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is its exoskeleton. It's made of chitin, which is undigestible. So the birds don't want a lot of exoskeleton. And because the caterpillar is soft, you can stuff it down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. And if you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. They take that beak, it's like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, many of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're nutritious, they're very high in fat, very high in protein. Again, very low percentage of chitin, of exoskeleton compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages, they're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and a lot of beetles have sharp edges. It's tough to stuff them down the throat of your baby. And finally, caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids, not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates. And we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. We have to get them from plants. Only plants make carotenoids. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. And that's why my wife, Cindy, makes sure I have lots of carrots. So I get my beta carotene, and lots of tomatoes. So I get my lycopene, lots of whatever that is. So I get my lutein. When I eat those things, it stimulates my immune system. I can't think of a better time to have a healthy immune system. Carotenoids are antioxidants. They run around our body and protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality, improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this male prothonotary warbler, who is bright yellow because he's had access to lots of luteins. And he takes those luteins, makes pigments out of them, puts them in his feathers, and the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. But where are they getting their carotenoids from? From the prey items they eat, of course. But carotenoid levels are not equal across invertebrate prey items. These first two bars are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than any other type of invertebrate prey. Here are the adult caterpillars down here, the moths and butterflies themselves, far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. It's just the caterpillars eating the green leaves. And here's the earthworm way down here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So that study and several others are suggesting pretty convincingly that caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. They are essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Let's return to the Carolina chickadees. A lot of data on Carolina chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take for them to reproduce successfully, to make a clutch of chickadees? Is 1 or 2 enough, or 1 or 2 a day enough? Well, 1 or 2 is not enough. It takes thousands of caterpillars to get the clutch just to the point where they leave the nest. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks in the nest. And that's just to get them to the point where they fledge. After they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. And of course, once they mature, they keep eating caterpillars. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to make 1 clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. That's 3 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, you have to have all of those caterpillars in your yard. The chickadees are foraging about 50 meters from the nest. And we do want chickadees to breed in our yards, because in so many places, that's all that's left. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. That takes too much energy. And if we design landscapes that do not have that many caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the major causes of the declines that we're measuring in our birds. We went to the original data set of Rosenberg et al. That's the group that said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And we divided the terrestrial birds of North America up into 2 groups: the species that require insects at some part of their life history, typically when they're breeding, and the species that don't ever require insects. So things like doves and finches that can reproduce entirely on seeds. They didn't lose any numbers at all in the last 50 years, but the species that require insects lost on average 10 million individuals per species. This doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly does suggest that as insects disappear, so do our birds. And you know, it's not rocket science. If you take away the bird food, you take away the birds. So I'm concluding that we need to rethink the goals of our human-dominated landscapes. In the past, 100 years, we've designed landscapes based almost entirely on aesthetics. How pretty can we make them? We've thought that plants are just decorations. We haven't thought about their ecological roles. But we can make pretty landscapes that also produce a lot of insects, especially caterpillars, so that we can have other living things near us. How do we do that? Well, you add caterpillars to landscapes by adding the plants that support them. That seems easy enough, but there is a catch, and that is that most plants don't support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about which ones we put in our landscapes if we want to meet the needs of those chickadees and all the other birds that need those caterpillars. And we have to be fussy because the caterpillars themselves are very fussy. And the monarch butterfly illustrates it perfectly. That's a monarch caterpillar. You can have all of the Asian ornamentals that you want in your yard, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing they're going to develop on is milkweeds. That's called host plant specialization. And it turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. Why is that? Well, plants have made them specialized. Plants don't want to. They do not want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. And particular insect species cannot adapt to all of those cocktails of chemical defenses. So they pick 1 or 2 that are very similar, and they get good at getting around those. So they develop particular enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds. Behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of evolutionary history with the particular plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. It does not happen overnight. And once they do fall into place, the insect is locked into eating that plant lineage. So the monarch right now is locked into eating milkweeds. If you take away the milkweeds, the monarch's not going to all of a sudden adapt to crepe myrtle or any other the Asian ornamentals that we have out there. They simply will disappear. And that's why when we bring in plants from other continents, our insects do disappear. They can't eat those plants. They have never seen those chemical defenses before. We can't wait for them to adapt to it. They disappear first. So what I'm trying to say here, not so eloquently, is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to reconstruct food webs so that we can rebuild the ecosystems around us, we have to choose the right plants or it's not going to work. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well it does work when you do choose the right plants. And I'm going to start with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. That's what it looked like when we moved in. We got a little piece of a farm that was broken up not that long ago. It was a farm that had been farmed a long time, almost 300 years. The soil was exhausted. The last thing they did before they sold the farm was mow it for hay. But when you mow for hay in this area, you're really mowing all the rootstocks of the Asian invasive species that are everywhere. The multiflora rose and oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle and autumn olive and miscanthus and on and on and on. You mow that and you call that hay. So of course, when we started building the house, they stopped mowing and that's what came back. All those rootstocks were alive. The 10 acres were completely choked with invasive plants. That's my wife, Cindy, getting ready to clear those 10 acres. So if you have a serious invasive problem, and you know, if you own any land, most people do have a problem with it. Don't give up. You can beat them. It's a lot of work, but you know, here's Cindy. She did it, living proof. As a matter of fact, she is outside right now, making sure that nobody sneaks back in there. What was I doing while she was clearing the land? I was going to put the plants back. I was telling her she was doing a great job. That was good. But my job was to put the plants back, to rebuild the food webs that support the biodiversity in our property. And to do that, I knew I had to bring in the plants that support a lot of caterpillars. So these are just examples. I wanted to see if I could get the Canadian outlet on our property. I'd never seen a Canadian outlet. That's what one looks like. Well, that's what the adult looks like, just like leaves. You're not going to have Canadian outlets unless you have meadow rue. And we didn't have any meadow rue. That's the only plant that they eat, host plant specialization. We didn't have any meadow rue when we moved in, but I'm sure it was here hundreds of years ago before the area was farmed to death. So I got some meadow rue from someplace and planted the seeds. They grew very nicely. But this was early on, and I actually had very little faith that the Canadian outlet would be able to find my little patch of meadow rue. There's really none around here. So I didn't even check it until I was walking by the planting for another reason about 2 months later, and it was covered with Canadian outlets. It attracted them right away. From where? I have no idea. But that was a big success. So now we have a good population of Canadian outlets and meadow rue. So we've added 2 species to the property. This is how we rebuild the biodiversity. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer for this beautiful moth. It has nothing to do with goldenrod. It is a specialist on this plant, Bidens aristosa. I did know where there was some Bidens and a Paroline cut about 14 miles away. So I went and got some seeds, planted them. They grew very nicely. Well, it took about a year for the moth to actually find my Bidens planting, but it did. Now I've got a good population of the goldenrod stowaway and Bidens aristosa. So now we've added 4 species to the property. Same story with the hackberry emperor. I wanted hackberry emperor on a property because it belonged here, not because it was the prettiest butterfly. It's not, but like its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry. And we didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. We had to wait 4 years before the butterflies found our hackberry, but they did. And again, now we have a good population of both hackberry and the hackberry emperor. I walked by one of my hackberry trees last June, and there were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. Another big success. I did not plant goldenrod, came in on its own, and along with it came many of the things that depend on goldenrod, like the brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. Now this is one that hasn't come, goldenrod flower moth. I don't know why it hasn't come. And this is what its caterpillars look like. So this is part of the fun. This is anticipation. It's like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out and I look at my goldenrod, trying to see if we got the goldenrod flower moth. And one of these years it will come, and that will be a great day. Planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. A lot of people don't like Virginia creeper, but I don't know why they don't like it. It is a great native plant. It's got good fall color. It climbs our trees without girdling them or pulling them down. It makes very nutritious berries for the birds in the fall, very high in fat. It's a great pollinator plant, even though the flowers are small and not showy at all. Many of our pollinators love them. You know, when you're putting in a pollinator garden, think of what the pollinators need. Think like a bee, not like a human, and then you'll meet their needs better. But the most important thing is it's a host plant for many of our big sphinx moths that are the primary food for cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Wanted to see if I get the double-toothed prominent on our property, just because it's such a cool looking caterpillar. Even if you don't like caterpillars, you got to like this guy. It's a specialist on elms. Well, the elm that should be around here is American elm. Of course, they all got wiped out with the Dutch elm disease, except a few elms at the University of Delaware. Huge trees that make a lot of seeds in the spring. I got some of those seeds, scooped them up out of the gutter, planted them. They grew very nicely. This was 19 years ago. And right now those trees are 80 feet tall. Caterpillar came right away. So another big success, American elm. Wanted the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. But we didn't have any evening primrose, Enithera, so I planted it. The moth came. It spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. It's very cute. And I planted lots of oak trees. Now, these are just examples of the plants that I put back in our yard. But I want to focus on oaks for a while because they're such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. Maybe some of you have seen it. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And I hear people say, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if your oak has to be 400 years old before you enjoy it, you're right, you won't. But if you enjoy what the oak is doing in your property, you can enjoy it almost immediately. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, which means they were free, or 2-foot bare root whips, which means they cost $1.50 each. And they didn't cost me anything because somebody gave them to me. But immediately they started to support the moths, the caterpillars that support the food web for most of the biodiversity in our yard. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the pleasant dagger moth, the delightful dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to the oaks of our property, and they come right away. This is a pin oak that has just popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. So you don't have to wait hundreds of years for your oaks to start to support the food web at your house. This is what our house looks like today. I am sitting in this one right up here. I show you this picture to convince you that we're traditional. We got a little lawn here, but we also put a lot of plants back. And every time I add a new lineage of plant to our yard, there's a good chance I will attract the moth specialists that depend on that plant. And because once I found out moths are so incredibly important in terms of supporting local biodiversity, I made it a goal to take a picture of every species of moth that we have attracted to our yard with these plantings. I'm still at it. I started 4 years ago, but I'm still at it. I am now up to 1,062 species of moths that I have taken pictures of at our yard. And we have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So in 1/240,000th of the landmass, we have 40% of all the moth species found in Pennsylvania. And because so many of these species are types of bird food, we have recorded 59 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred, which is 38% of all the terrestrial bird species in Pennsylvania. Why am I telling you this? Well, I saw this headline this past fall too. The World Wildlife Fund says that we've lost 2/3 of our wildlife since 1970. But I'm thinking, not at our house. I am sure that we have increased biodiversity by at least 2/3, and it didn't take that long to do it. And we did it simply by putting the important plants back, something that everybody can do. So don't despair when you see these headlines. Don't throw up your hands and give up. It's just a signal. It's time to get to work. Just put those plants back and we can rejuvenate the biodiversity around us. But I know what you're thinking. Cindy and I own 10 acres. Will it work on a smaller plot? Most people live in suburbs or cities. Are they out of luck? Well, that's a good question. Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. And they're in the middle of a typical development. All their neighbors have the big lawns. When they moved in, their land was choked with the very common invasive that's in Kirkwood, Missouri, which is Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. So they got rid of that. Then they planted lots of species of native plants, put in a water feature they call a bubbler, and then they sat back and started to count the birds that are using their yard. And they're up to 149 bird species that have used their yard, including 35 warbler species. Now, to put that in perspective, even though we have 18 times more land, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. How about urban yards, though? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, because right on the other side of this wall here is O'Hare Airport, one of the runways of O'Hare Airport. Right over here is Kennedy Expressway. Pam has 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size in the US. It's a very pretty 1/10 of an acre, but it's isolated. She's not connected to any natural area at all. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive plants, put in 60 species of native plants, a water feature, and then she sat back and started to count the birds. And look at that, I'm behind the times here. She got 120 species of birds have used her art. She added one just the other day, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, you can go to Pam's house in Chicago. And there's one sitting there right by her water feature. What about city centers, though? 82% of people in North America live in cities. Are they going to be out of luck? Well, in 2014, I was staring at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa. People call it butterfly weed. But that reminds me, we got a marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So let's not call this butterfly weed anymore. Let's call it Monarch's Delight. So 2014, I'm staring at Monarch's Delight. The first thing I saw were 2 species of leafcutter bees, a bigger one and a smaller one. I know they're leafcutter bees because they carry their pollen on their tummy, not on their legs. Leafcutter bees have very strict requirements. They are not everywhere. They need pollen and they need nectar, but they also need soft leaves. Leaves on plants like redbud are perfect because they carve out the edges of those leaves, leave little semicircles, roll up what they carved out into a tube, stuff it full of pollen and lay an egg on it. And then they put the whole package into a crack or a crevice, and that's how they reproduce. Well, there was a redbud growing right next to the Monarch's Delight there, and I'm sure that's all the needs of the leafcutter bees were met, and that's why they were there. Pretty sure that's why there were bumblebees there as well. Bumblebee overwinter as queens, remember? So when they come out in the spring, it's just the queen. She's got to do all the work to start the colony until she has a first generation of workers to help her out. So she needs a lot of plentiful supply of forage, of pollen and nectar, so she can do it very efficiently. And that's exactly what redbud supplies. And then I saw a monarch. Actually, I saw 2 monarchs. And this was June. It's very early to be seeing monarchs this far north. And remember, it's 2014. I had gone all of 2013 without seeing a single monarch. That was the low point in the eastern population of monarchs. There are only 3.6% of the monarchs left compared to 1976. So I was impressed because, maybe they weren't going to disappear after all. Why were they there? Well, they were on Monarch's Delight. They had that host plant, but there was another milkweed there as well. I think it was purple milkweed. They had nectar, but they also had their host plant, so they could reproduce everything they needed. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of Manhattan. The High Line is a elevated railroad that was abandoned for decades. Somebody went up there and noticed a bunch of native plants growing all by themselves. Nobody was taking care of them. So they decided, let's make this a tourist destination. And they did. So along the High Line, 30 feet above the taxis, right in the middle of Manhattan, they've got this 3-foot strip of plants. Not all of them are native, but a lot of them are. And now it really is a successful tourist destination. Literally millions of people go to the High Line every year, so it's always crowded up there. Yet all the things I saw are there as well. There's the Monarch's Delight. This is Rick Dark. He was always after me to go to the High Line and see the beautiful plants. I'm not much of a city boy, so I always drag my feet. And seeing beautiful plants with nothing using them is actually depressing to me. And that's what I thought I would see if I went to the middle of Manhattan and saw 3 feet of plants. But I was totally wrong. I was totally wrong. And it has convinced me that if thoughtful native plannings can bring life back to the center of Manhattan, we can do this anywhere. We can succeed anywhere. And that's good news. There are 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way, which we want to do. And one of them is we've got to shrink the area that we have in lawn. Just in the US, there's over 40 million acres of lawn. And that's a 2005 statistic. So we know it's more than that. That's an area bigger than the size of New England, dedicated to a dead ecological landscape. It's a status symbol. It is not designed to support the life around us. And we humans depend on status symbols. They're important to us. We're not going to give them up. So I'm not suggesting we get rid of the lawn, but I am suggesting we cut the area of lawn in half. We can still have our manicured status symbol. We can still project the message that we are good citizens. Our neighbors will love us, but we're going to put plants back in the other side. And if we do that in half the area that is in lawn, that'll give us 20 million acres to work with in conservation. And if we do this at home, we can create a new national park at home that I'm calling Homegrown National Park. And it's going to be big. It's going to be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all these, still less than 20 million acres. So we will have the largest park in North America. What are the benefits of putting a park or some part of nature right where you live? Well, it gives you the opportunity to develop a personal relationship with the natural world at your own time, your own pace, right where you live. All you have to do is go outside. You can avoid crowds. If you go to a real national park, there's spectacular places, but there are millions of people there. And if that's not your goal, it's hard to escape them. It's also free. There is no admission fee. It's never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the pike. No travel hassles. You get to experience the natural world alone, which I think is essential to developing that personal relationship with the natural world. You don't have to tell anybody about it. And it won't be mediated through anybody. It's you and nature. And this is, I think it's particularly important for our kids, who Richard Louv says they're suffering from nature deficit disorder. We're trying to expose them to nature. We get 30 kids and put them on a bus with a teacher, and they drive for an hour to some natural area and they walk around. Teacher tells them not to touch anything. Then they get back on the bus and they go home. And that's their experience with the natural world, which I'm sure is better than nothing. But it's really an experience with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. Why do our kids need to develop a relationship with nature? They're the future stewards of our planet. And if they don't understand what they're stewarding or why they're stewarding it, if they don't love stewarding it, they're going to be lousy stewards. And maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter, Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest piece of nature. It's a little patch of grass with a hedge, but there are anole lizards there. And when she discovered the anole lizards, she sent me a picture to describe, this is how you hunt them. You get on the ground and you cover yourself with leaves and sticks so the lizards don't see you coming. And then you crawl slowly towards the lizard. No smiling, this is serious business. You can wear your best dress, that's okay. But you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, you learn how to take care of that lizard. You've got a personal relationship with that part of the natural world. Now, I don't think Zoe's going to be catching lizards on the ground in her best dress the rest of her life. I don't think. She sent me this picture the other day, so who knows. I guarantee, though, she's going to remember catching lizards in Hawaii the rest of her life. And I also guarantee she's going to be a good steward of the planet, largely because of this close relationship she has with nature. If you want your kids to do more than catch lizards, get Nancy Stranisti's Nature Play at Home. It gives you dozens of examples of how to expose your kids to nature. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, you can do it in Canada, maybe by the end of June. We're working to expand our Homegrown National Park. You go to homegrownnationalpark.org, put in your the statistics for where you live and the amount of area you're going to return to nature, typically the area you take out of lawn, and your part of Canada will light up with a firefly here, and you can be part of this movement to get those 20 million acres replanted. And you know, it's our attempt at social media. We're trying to get beyond the choir. I've been talking to the choir for over 10 years, but there's still millions of people who don't know anything about how important it is for them to be good stewards of the planet. So this is an effort to get them on board, even if it's just through social media. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants should we put in the area we take out of lawn? I'm arguing that some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. Now, remember what a keystone is. This is a Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take the keystone out, the arch collapses. Well, I'm calling keystone plants because if you take them out of the local food web, the food web collapses. And that's because the keystone species are making most of the food. Just 5% of North America's native plants species are making 75% of that caterpillar food that drives the food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives the food webs. So think of the keystone plants in your yard as the 2x4s holding up the ecological house that you're building. They're essential. The house is not going to stand up without them. You can't build a house out of wallpaper, which is what we've been trying to do with those ornamental plants forever. You're not done building your house when you put in the keystone plants, but they are essential. The question is no longer simply, are natives better than non-natives in terms of supporting the nature around us? They certainly are on average, but there are a lot of native plants that aren't all that productive either. So we want to focus on the ones that are most productive, those ecological powerhouses. They're going to be better than the ones that are pretty benign, and certainly better than those non-native ecologically destructive plants that escape our yards and become serious invasive species. The buckthorns, the burning bushes, the barberries, all of those guys that are biologically polluting our natural areas. You know, those invasive plants are displacing the native plants that support our food webs. I get an email once in a while from somebody saying, don't I know that ginkgos, ginkgo biloba from Asia, actually grew in North America 7 million years ago? And the argument is that makes them native, so that we can plant them and everything would be great. Well, yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today, but I'm not going to have that argument because that's not the metric anymore. It's not whether they're native or not. It's whether they're productive or not. I don't care whether ginkgos grew on the moon 7 million years ago. They produce 0 species of caterpillars. You plant a ginkgo, that's what you get, a ginkgo, but nothing else. What is the most productive plant in North America in terms of supporting caterpillars, the most productive keystone plant? It's one of the oaks that we have. And 84% of the counties in which they occur, oaks are the #1 keystone plant. In the mid-Atlantic states where I live, they support 557 species of caterpillars. Over 950 species nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that. This is the power of keystone oaks in my yard. So far, I've taken pictures of 1,062 moss species. Now, I haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. I'll get to them soon. Out of the 1,062 species, 932 have known host plants. So there's over 100 that we don't know what they're eating. Out of the 932 species, 278 species use oaks. And we've got 69 genera of native woody plants on our property, and only one of them is the genus Quercus. And we have hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity. But they support almost 30% of our moss species diversity. Imagine what would happen if I get rid of all the oaks on my property, or if I had never planted them to begin with. We would only have a fraction of the biodiversity at our house that we have right now. How do you find out what the keystone species are where you live? Well, we don't have a tool for Canada, but we do for North America. It's called the Native Plant Finder and National Wildlife Federation website. You can put in your zip code and the ranked list of both woody and herbaceous plants will pop up. So if you, I'm not sure which counties are directly south of you, but go to those counties and you'll get a pretty good representation of what you will find where you are in Canada. So notice this is a typical list, and I stopped because I ran out of room, not because it's all the plants. But I talk about native oaks or native cherries or native willows. And by the way, the farther north you go, the higher willows become ranked. And when oaks drop out, willows take over as the #1 keystone plant. But I say native. If you go to the store and say, I want to buy a willow, they're going to sell you a weeping willow from Turkey. If you want to buy a cherry, they'll sell you an ornamental cherry from Asia. You've got to specify that you want a native member of these genera, because if you get non-native members, it reduces caterpillar use by 65%. We've done that study. These are typically the highest ranked herbaceous plants. Goldenrod always way up there. The various genera that asters were broken up into are up there. Perennial sunflower is very high. Not only are they highest in terms of supporting caterpillars, but they're also the best in terms of supporting our specialist bees. Those 3 genera alone will support over 40 species of bees that can't reproduce on anything else. So if you don't have those in your yard, you've just lost 40 species of native bees. All right, we're going to shrink our lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to attract a lot of insects to our yard, and then we're going to kill them with our security light, which of course is not the goal. There's a lot of research, much of it coming from Europe, but it suggests that light pollution at night is one of the major causes of insect decline. These are all the ways that lights are killing our insects at night, every night that we have them on when it's warm. But to me, this is actually good news. We have to turn insect declines around. We simply cannot tolerate it anymore. We've got to rebuild insect populations everywhere we can. And if we can get there by simply flicking a switch, turning out our lights, we're getting off easy. That's good news. But I know what you're going to say. Well, I can't turn out the light over my garage because the bad man will come. All right, put a motion sensor on it so that it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to notice is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white light out of your security, the white bulb out of your security light, and put in a yellow bulb, because yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to nocturnal insects than our white wavelengths. And yellow LED lights are the least attractive. So if we switched out our white bulbs with yellow LED bulbs overnight, we would save billions of insects, and billions a lot of dollars too, because it's much more energy efficient. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to turn out our lights. We're going to invite a bunch of keystone plants, species to our yard. And then we're going to hire Mosquito Joe to come kill all our insects. We just have no end of the ways we like to kill our insects. This is a booming business at least around the US. I assume it's big business in Canada as well. But Mosquito Joe says it's okay, because that's what he's fogging here is a natural product. It is pyrethroids made from chrysanthemums. And so natural means good. Well, cyanide's a natural product too, so I'm not sure that's a good argument. Mosquito Joe also says that it will only kill mosquitoes, and that's not even close to true. I don't know if you saw the headlines last year during the fall monarch migration. There were huge monarch kills after mosquito fogging in a couple of places in the US as they moved south. Just the opposite of what we're trying to do. The big thing is it doesn't work. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You control them in the larval stage. In order to control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of them. Mosquito Joe kills about 10% of that. That study's been done. So it's not even close to working. Plus, he's very expensive, and that's why he has to keep coming back and back and back. If you want to control mosquitoes, this is a much better way to do it. Get a bucket. People say, how big a bucket? As big as you want. You know, the bigger the better. Fill it full of water. Put in a handful of straw or hay. Don't stuff it full of straw or hay. Just a handful, and let it ferment in the warm sun for a couple of days. You're building up the population of diatoms and algae, and that's what larval mosquitoes eat. This becomes an irresistible brew for female mosquitoes. They're going to lay their eggs in there. And once they lay their eggs, you put in a mosquito dunk. You get this at the hardware store. It's cheap. This is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic Diptera. So you put in one of these discs, the mosquito larvae eat the disc, and it kills them. The only aquatic Dipteran in your bucket is a mosquito larvae. So don't go throwing these in natural swamps or ponds, because it will also kill chironomids, which are very important parts of the aquatic ecosystem. But in your bucket, it's the way to go. If you get a dragonfly in here, it won't touch it. If your dog drinks it or a bird drinks it, no problem at all. Fourth thing we need to do is to design landscapes that allow caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in southern Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the Polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then it spins a cocoon and hangs from a branch, then it emerges as an adult, and then it does it all over again. And I wish everything did that, but most species don't. So not just on oaks, but no matter what the tree, most of the caterpillars finish growing on the tree, and then they drop from the tree and they wiggle their way underneath the ground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that is the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. And this is the way we landscape all over the place. We mow and we compact the soil to the point where it's too hard for any caterpillar to wiggle underneath. And that makes our typical landscape ecological traps. The moths come in, lay their eggs, the caterpillars grow, they drop down and die. And of course, the cement landscape is even less of a viable option. This is what most people do. They have a tree in a yard. Nobody's measured the success of caterpillars in a situation like this, but I'm guarantee it's going to be higher in a situation like this, where you have a layered landscape. You have a tree, and then maybe a Florida dogwood, a native azalea, ferns, ground cover. The caterpillar drops down into a safe site. The soil's nice and loose under there, so they can get underground and pupate, or they can spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under there. They're not going to be trampled. They're not going to be mowed. Safe site. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. This is how you shrink the lawn. You put beds around your trees instead of lawn, instead of dirt, instead of cement. Caterpillar drops down to a safe site. This is where you can use your ground covers, things like wild ginger or foam flower or mayapple or ferns. This is a hotel in Athens, Georgia. These are red maples. Any caterpillar developing on these red maples will drop down into the fern bank and be able to complete its development, even though it's the middle of a city. So we can do a whole lot better in terms of maintaining that food web simply by the way we landscape under our trees. Another grad student, or former grad student, Desiree Narango, doing a postdoc up in Massachusetts right now, did some wonderful work with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And the results of her study suggest that there actually is room for compromise in our plant choice. And that's good news to me. What she did was compare how well landscapes dominated by native plants sustain chickadee populations compared to landscapes dominated by introduced plants. These are typical suburban yards inside the Beltway in Washington. And the first thing she found out is that when the landscapes are dominated by introduced plants, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So 75% less bird food available for the chickadees. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. There were nest boxes up in each landscape, but the chickadees came and they looked around and they said, there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, those nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. The clutches were 29% less likely to survive. If they did survive, the nest produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to actually fledge. And when they did, those nestlings were lighter, so they had less of a chance of surviving. If you put all of that information into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native woody plants in the landscape, from none to 100%, this is what you get. We looked at woody plants because that's where chickadees forage. This dotted line is the replacement rate. This is the rate at which the population has to make babies to replace the adults that die every year. Chickadees don't live very long, so they've got to reproduce at this level. If they do, that's a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make more babies than adults die, you've got a growing population. But if you make fewer, anything down here, you've got a shrinking, unsustainable population. Right here is where, generously speaking, is where those lines overlap, which means you can have up to 30% of the woody plant biomass in your yard non-native. None of them can be invasive. We can't tolerate that. But you know, things like your boxwood or your forsythia, they're not moving around. Up to 30% non-native without destroying the local food web. But 70% has to be native plants. And if they're productive native plants, that's even better. So this is the area of compromise that I'm talking about. And it's good news to me. If my message was you can't have any non-native plants at all, but very few people would listen because we love our non-native plants. Remember, it is not the presence of non-native plants that destroys local food webs. It's the absence of the native plants that sustain them. So get more of these native plants into our landscapes and we can tolerate our non-natives. Can we use native plants in formal designs? Of course we can. I got this an email just well, 2 or 3 weeks ago from Lynn O'Shaughnessy. This is a formal garden. As a matter of fact, you don't get more formal than that. This is taken from a drone. So it's a pretty big garden. It's way up there. Every plant in that planting is a native plant. So formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants and the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe all the time. I guess that's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. It formalizes it. It's not just a pile of weeds. It's effective. It's providing pollen for a number of species of native bees. It's not very big, but if everybody did it, it would help a lot. Remember why we need pollinators. The standard line is, oh, they pollinate 1/3 of our crops. It's actually about a 1/12 of our crops. That's not a good argument because a lot of people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. We need pollinators because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. Where do we need these pollinators? Everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. How about this design? It's a Drew Latham design. It's much bigger than the other one, but it's still formalized. Imagine the amount of life supported here versus the amount of life that is supported here. No brainer. Can municipalities help with us live with nature? Absolutely, and more of them are doing it. Minnesota kicked it off in the States several years ago, has a cost sharing program to encourage homeowners to replace some or all of their lawn with appropriate Minnesota native prairie plants. It's called the Lawn to Legume program. Very successful. Pennsylvania got a brand new lawn conversion program. You get up to $5,000 per acre to convert your big lawn to a native planting. It was designed to help watersheds, and it does help watersheds, but it sure helps biodiversity too. Florida. There's an island of Florida that's paying its residents to allow burrowing owls to burrow in the front yard. This is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your property, we're going to pay you to take care of it rather than fine you if you use your property. Everybody would want an endangered species. Missouri and Fayetteville, Arkansas have a bounty on calorie pears. Take out your calorie pear, you get a free tree replacement. And even water utilities are getting into the act, particularly in the Southwest. In San Antonio, you get a $100 coupon if you're going to plant water efficient native plants and take out those water thirsty non-natives. And of course, the very successful lawn conversion programs in California, up to $2 per square foot rebate if you get rid of your lawn and put in appropriate xeric plantings. Also very successful. I think we've made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. The first is somehow we started to think of nature as optional. In other words, it's not essential. We like it. It's entertaining. As a matter of fact, I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out, and there's this wall-sized poster there that epitomizes, I think, our society's view of conservation. We want to save wildlife, save nature for future generations to enjoy. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for creating the national park system. Create these national parks so the future generations can enjoy the splendor of North America. And of course, our park system, our parks are entertaining. Nature is entertaining, but it's far more than that. We need to save nature so that we have future generations, not just so that they can entertain us. No wonder we don't think it's essential. Congress has declared that the budget for the national park system is a non-essential item. And it's not very big to begin with. The entire budget for the national park system is equal to 1 B-3 bomber. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, we talked about this, but if we restrict conservation efforts only to the places where there's not a lot of humans, which every day is fewer and fewer, we're going to fail because those places are too small and too isolated from each other. David Quammen has a great analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. This is a functional Persian rug. That's not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. And I hate that language because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. As a matter of fact, it suggests most of the Earth has no ecological significance. Not true. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roads, even including much of our agriculture. So we need to replant all of our human-dominated spaces. We need to glue our rug back together again, focusing on those keystone plants. We're not just going to make biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move back and forth between viable habitats. We're going to create viable habitats where we live, where we work, where we play, where we farm. So for the first time in modern history, we're going to share our spaces with nature. We're going to coexist. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, a few ecologists, a few conservation biologists. We didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of everybody on the planet. But I don't know why, because everybody on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody bear the responsibility of good Earth stewardship? Stan Rushworth, a Cherokee elder, once said that the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with these mindsets, you're taught them. We're really good at teaching this one. We are terrible at teaching this one, teaching our kids and our peers that we all, everybody, has an obligation to good Earth stewardship. That doesn't mean that you have to save biodiversity for a living, although it is a good living. But you can save it where you live, and if you do, it empowers you. And right now people feel powerless. Oh, the Earth's problems are so huge. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can get rid of their invasive plants. One person can put a pollinator garden in. One person can use keystone plants. That makes one person an important cog in the future wheel of conservation. You can watch the ecosystem in your yard regenerate and enhance your local greater ecosystem rather than degrade it. It also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. Just worry about your little piece of the Earth, the piece that you can influence. If you own property, that's obvious. That's where you're going to start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded, they're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So as a property owner or a volunteer, each one of us has the power. We certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we do so is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own fate. I think I've convinced my grandkids that you are nature's best hope. hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much.
Well, Professor Talamy, thank you very much for that presentation and inspirational message to us. So really appreciate hearing. You've left me with some concrete actions I want to take in my own yard, looking at my oaks and willows as keystone species. So I really appreciate what you had to say tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was looking for questions online, and that was terrific. I think for a lot of us, the focus has been on pollinators, and to shift that mindset to looking at caterpillars really is going to make me rethink my landscape choices, and certainly some of the plants that I'll be using in my garden.
Well, pollinators are very important. They're just not the only important group. And remember,
Absolutely.
a lot of moths turn into pollinators as adults. There are a lot of, most of the moths do pollination at night and we don't see it. But there are 14,000 species of moths in North America and only 4,000 species of bees. So they are important pollinators as well.
And an important food source for birds and further up the food chain.
Essential, yeah.
By the way, I wanted to mention that there is a Canadian Wildlife Federation, somewhat analogous to the National Wildlife Federation in the States, and they also have a searchable online database for Canadian native plants, which is called Wild About Gardening.
Oh, great.
So,
could you send me that website? Or I'm writing it down. I guess I can find it.
I'd be happy to send it to you. And one of the, I have a background as a policy wonk, and I was fascinated to hear about some of the municipal incentives. And actually our club, back in about a month ago, we responded to the City of Ottawa's request for comments on their multi-year draft plan, which unfortunately called for an awful lot of concrete. So we, of course, as plant lovers and garden lovers, were arguing for more emphasis on biodiversity, and that's I suspect going to be an ongoing battle. But I think you've given us some useful ammunition.
We know that all of the concrete as a default landscape in cities destroys the local food or the local watershed. We know that. And also cement is a major emitter of carbon dioxide. It's we know this. That's
absolutely.
Well, keep up the fight.
Doug, we do have a question from Alison Murray. She would like a comment on gypsy moths. She says, we are expecting a big infestation this year. Do they provide a benefit for birds? And then we have somebody below also saying, by Barb, they're aerial spraying for gypsy moths in my area. So worried about the birds. So what do you have to say about that?
You should be worried about the birds. What they spray is, I assume it's Bacillus thuringiensis, which kills gypsy moth, but it kills all the caterpillars. So you've just wiped out the caterpillars that the migrants need, but up in Canada, they're breeding. I mean, that's what they're going to rear their young on. Now they've got nothing to rear their young on where they have sprayed. Gypsy moth and any other introduced insect are terrible, terrible problems. When I say we need insects, I am not talking about invasive insects or non-native insects, because they're here without their natural enemies. So they go crazy. And gypsy moth, of course, when it's a large caterpillar, eats almost anything, but it really is an oak specialist. So they hammer the oaks, and if you get your oaks defoliated 2 or 3 years in a row, it can kill them, and you can't tolerate that either. So what do? It is a huge problem. It's why we don't want these invasive insects. We create these problems and then try to figure out what to do about it. But one thing, what you can do is pray for rain. because there is a fungus which made its way here from Europe. Nobody knows how, but it is the best control for gypsy moth. It breaks out and controls gypsy moth really well. That's why it'll disappear for 10, 15 years at a time. But when you have a series of very dry years, it can start to explode, and that's what you've had. But even though you had a lot of gypsy moths last year, it's not a guarantee that you will have them this year. Although you should know by now whether you're going to have them. They would have hatched, because the fungus can break out and kill them all. So pray, and it's cool, wet springs that do that.
Well, that's good. Let's pray for rain then.
Yes.
Okay, we have another question here. It's from Tula. She would like to know what plants we can grow that would support the types of insects that aerial insectivores depend on, such as nighthawks and swifts.
Okay. Yeah, the nighthawks, all of the nightjars depend largely on night flying moths, particularly the large moths. So the giant silk moths, and this ties into gypsy moth. Many of the giant silk moths are already gone from New England, because one of the early attempts at biocontrol was to bring over a tachinid fly that does hit gypsy moth, but it's a generalist and it hits a lot of things, including those big giant silk moths. So they're disappearing, and that fly is being blamed for a lot of it. The night lights are being blamed for a lot of it, but our night jars, including the nighthawk, have declined 90% because of the loss of those big night flying moths. And by the way, bats depend on them too. So what can we do? Anything that makes moths is going to help those guys. Swifts, on the other hand, are getting day flying insects, and many of them are very small. So that's one of the groups. Remember, I said 16 out of the 20 families rear their young on caterpillars. Swifts and swallows are one of the groups that do not. They're rearing their young on the things that they can catch while they're flying around during the day. So, for example, if a mower or a cow walks through a field and kicks up insects, that's what they're catching. A lot of them are leaf hoppers. So the aquatic situations like moths or marshes and lakes produce a lot of midges, a lot of mosquitoes. Another thing that's coming, the crane flies, the caddis flies that are flying up out of that moist ground are taken by the swallows and the swifts, or any of the meadow insects. But they actually take very, very few caterpillars because they're not flying in the air. So
very interesting. Great. We have this question from Julianne. Are Americans moving away from pesticides in urban area spaces? I'm curious. We've had a pesticide ban in Ontario for almost a decade.
Yeah, you're way ahead of us. But yes, we're moving in that direction. Neonicotinoids have gotten, a terrible reputation.
She corrected herself. Pesticide ban in urban spaces.
Yeah. I know Toronto led the way years ago. There's no bans in agriculture, but there are a lot of data that suggests all that stuff you put on your lawn causes cancer. I mean, it causes cancer in your cats and your dogs, and lymphoma in your kids. So nasty stuff. Yeah, are we moving away from it? Yes, slowly, but we're certainly not. We're we're moving more slowly than you are. That's for sure.
Yeah, I had a dog getting a cancer in his leg from the same thing, going through farmers' fields where I used to live. And yeah, it's.
Well, when you put the fertilizer on your lawn, if you read the bag, most of them have a broadleaf herbicide in the bag. They don't even tell you that. It's just part of the fertilizer. And it says, after you apply this, take your shoes off before you go into the house. You know how long you're supposed to take your shoes off? The rest of the season. Ooh. So, we put it on, and then the next day our kids are out rolling around in it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, we've got a good question here about a nearby urban forest near me, this is Norley, is overrun with European buckthorn. Are you aware of successful efforts to convert an area from one like this to a more native dominated one?
Yes, but don't ask me for specific. There are groups all over from Michigan all the way east that are taking on big buckthorn projects and succeeding. But it is, it's an enormous amount of work. There's no doubt about it. And until you kill the root system and get rid of the seed stock and the seed rain that keeps coming down from people who don't get rid of their buckthorn, it's a constant job. There's two ways. So you get rid of the buckthorn, you've got this big open space. What do you do with that? Well, there's two ways you can put the native plants back. And one is just addition by subtraction. In other words, you continue to remove the things you don't want every year and this is where you're letting nature take its course. The native plants that come in, leave them. And that works really well when you don't have too many deer, because the deer eat all the native plants and makes it very hard for regeneration. And the second way is to actually be active in planting the native plants. So the first way is easier, because even when you're planting the natives, you still have to be mindful about the reinvasion of buckthorn and burning brush and all the other things. So just like the gypsy moth, these plants that we brought in to sell as ornamentals, and in many places still sell them, are just enormous, enormous problems. If we charge the cleanup to the people selling them, they wouldn't sell them anymore.
That's true. Good point. Yeah. Okay, so another tough question here. What do you think about the law in, I guess it's California, CA, that prevents people from trying to raise and release monarchs?
I didn't know there was such a law. I do know about the controversy. Of course, the California monarch is in just terrible shape. 99.9% gone. If there's going to be an extinction event in the next couple of years, that's where it's going to happen. Rearing monarchs and releasing them is it's not going to solve that problem. And I understand where people want to do that. What will solve it is putting all the milkweeds back, and California is such a disaster with their drought and their fire, and the entire Central Valley, 100% agriculture. So if we can save the monarch by replanting in California, we'll be able to succeed anywhere. But that's going to be more important in terms of saving the monarch, is creating the habitat that they have lost. The problem with rearing is that a lot of the monarchs, you're always rearing them in crowded conditions. So it's great for disease transmission, and people worry about releasing diseased monarchs. But the positive parts are, it's a great educational tool. It's usually the first way that kids get introduced to insects at all, to the process of metamorphosis. They get fascinated with the natural world that way. It's a great message about host plant specialization. So you recognize, well, the only way that we're going to save monarchs is through milkweeds. That's true for almost all the insects that are out there, not just monarchs. So there are positives to it. So personally, I have mixed feelings about it. I didn't know there was a law. So,
well, apparently, Barb Carrick, the law was just recently passed in California.
All right.
Yeah. I've got someone else here, Alison Murray. She says, I've been scraping the egg casings off trees.
Of gypsy moth.
I'm not sure what she's referring to.
It's probably the gypsy moth. Yeah, scrape away. That's good. So your gypsy moths haven't hatched yet, huh? You're usually out with bud break. You haven't had any bud break yet?
No, I have them on a service berry and on an American hazelnut in my garden.
Yeah.
They're there. They're small. They're still only about a centimeter long.
Okay, well, scrape and squish and
Then
yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it for questions. Anybody else have questions? I can't get over how many beautiful pictures of moths you gave us and caterpillars. I've
Just a
learned so
fraction
much.
of what's out there. Oh, they're beautiful.
And they're
man.
beautiful, those photographs. They're fantastic. Wow.
That was actually going to be my question. Are those are your photographs, are they, Douglas?
They are. That's the
They
fun part
are
of this is, yeah.
really stunning.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Well, I have stunning subjects.
I
And
do
you know,
have-
digital
they're good
photography
enough to
has made it
pose for you,
so
too.
easier. Caterpillars pose really well. They really do. Birds don't pose as well, but caterpillars do. They're good posers.
I have a quick question from a friend actually about goldenrods. I mean, are all native goldenrods good keystone
Yes.
species there? Nothing to pick from? I mean, they're just
Well, it depends on your situation. Canada goldenrod is really aggressive. So if you have just a small area for goldenrod in your garden, I would pick something else because that will spread.
Hmm.
So I love it because it competes well against all the non-natives I don't want. But if you don't have an invasive problem and you don't want it to spread everywhere, then there are many other goldenrod species, and none of them are as aggressive as Canada goldenrod. So
that's a great tip. Thank you.
I've got someone here, Sunny. She's asking, do you recommend a specific field guide for identifying moth caterpillars?
I do. David L. Wagner's Caterpillars of Eastern North America is one of them. And if you can get a hold of his other book, The Owlets, which focuses on the superfamily Noctuoidea, it's much bigger. The problem is he let that go out of print. So you can only get it used now. If you see it in a bookstore or something, grab it, because if you buy it on Amazon, it's like $300 when it originally was 25. So,
Wow.
but it's a great source. So
Excellent.
I was really mad at him when he did that. He said that his fellow specialists did not appreciate it enough, so he let it go out of print. I said, well, you're punishing the rest of us for that.
Oh, wow. So, Kate, you asked the question by Karen, is that right? Or
That's right. Actually, Karen and I were in touch on another channel as well. So
I see.
We've all
Okay, I see.
converged. So.
Okay. All right. So you've asked her question then. Great. About specific native recommendations of goldenrod, and that was what you gave. Okay. Good. Wow. There was so much information you gave us and all those wonderful pictures, boom, 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 of all the caterpillars. I had no idea. Beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful.
I still went over time. I say this is too much to say.
Not much.
But we have not lost anybody on either of our channels. So you didn't go over time. Every minute of your talk was very much appreciated. And just what a wonderful wealth of information. Thank you so much for
You're welcome. You're
joining
welcome.
us tonight
Inspiring.
and for really helping to educate us in ways that we can rebuild that Persian carpet.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, that was beautiful. Yeah,
Was.
good analogy.
Well, we'll say good night to everybody in the live stream. I'll just I'll stop the broadcast for now.